A single statement, barely a sentence long, and it's been looping inside the paddock ever since. The boss of the most famous team in motorsport just told the world there is a hidden weakness sitting inside his own car, a weakness so sensitive he will not describe it in public. And yet, the moment those words left his mouth, the entire conversation around Ferrari's 2026 season flipped on its head. For months, everyone thought they knew exactly why the red cars kept falling short on Saturdays. The explanation was tidy, almost too tidy, and it gave rival teams a comfortable story to believe. But now the man who runs the Scuderia has ripped up that script, and in its place he has left a puzzle that nobody inside the sport has managed to solve yet. What makes this so unsettling is not just what Fred Vasseur said, but the way he said it. The deliberate choice of words that tells you this is not a small calibration issue or a minor software tweak. This is something baked into the very DNA of the SF26, something that Ferrari's own engineers have been chasing since the first race in Melbourne, and something that, if they cannot fix it soon, might end up defining an entire championship fight that is already balanced on a knife edge. To understand why a handful of words from a team principal can send such a shockwave through Formula One, you have to rewind to the pattern that has made this season feel like a broken record for anyone wearing red. The 2026 campaign has produced a Ferrari that genuinely looks like two completely different machines depending on which day of the weekend you watch. On Sunday, when the fuel loads are high and the race settles into its rhythm, the SF26 is often the car that everybody in front is nervously watching in their mirrors. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have carved through the field time and again, pulling off overtakes that should not be possible from their starting positions, managing their tires so brilliantly that they somehow find grip when everyone around them is sliding. The data backs up what the eye can see. Ferrari's race pace, stint after stint, sits right at the sharp end, often within a tenth or two of whoever is leading and occasionally faster. The tire degradation curves that get passed around engineering briefing rooms show the SF26 looking after its rubber like a car that was designed specifically to win on Sundays. And that is exactly what makes Saturdays so painful to watch. Because when the same drivers, in the same car with the same engines roll out for qualifying, the stopwatch tells a completely different story. Those crucial tenths that separate pole position from the third row simply disappear, and not in a way that looks like a simple lack of power. If you study the qualifying telemetry traces, which several technical analysts have done and shared online, you see the deficit is not concentrated on the long straights where an engine deficit would show up. It is sprinkled through the slow corners, the medium-speed direction changes, the spots where a car's chassis and its mechanical grip have to work in perfect harmony to give the driver confidence to attack. Leclerc, a man widely regarded as one of the greatest single-lap specialists of his generation, has spoken with a measured frustration about the car not giving him the front-end bite he needs in the first sector of several circuits. Hamilton, whose qualifying prowess was once so feared that rivals openly admitted they studied his telemetry to understand how he extracted lap time, has been similarly searching for a feeling that simply isn't there when the car is on low fuel and fresh soft tires. The drivers are not making uncharacteristic mistakes. The team is not getting the tire preparation wildly wrong. Something deeper is refusing to let the SF26 wake up on Saturday afternoons. When a pattern this consistent stretches across multiple circuits with wildly different characteristics, from high-speed sweeps like Silverstone to stop-start street tracks like Monaco, the finger naturally gets pointed at what every modern Formula One car shares, regardless of downforce level: the power unit. And there was good reason to suspect the hybrid system. The 2026 regulations completely rewrote the engine formula, shifting the balance heavily towards electrical power, and every manufacturer has been on a steep learning curve. Reports emerged early in the season, some from well-connected Italian outlets and others from the paddock rumor mill, suggesting Ferrari's energy deployment strategy was too conservative in qualifying, that their harvesting maps were leaving something on the table compared to what Mercedes and Red Bull powertrains were able to deploy over a single flying lap. It made sense. The same system that is gentle on tires and efficient over a race might be dialed back when the driver demands every last kilowatt for 3 sectors of absolute attack. Most of the F1 media ecosystem, including some of the most respected technical journalists, settled on this as the primary explanation. Ferrari, the story went, had built a race engine that forgot how to qualify. Then Fred Vasseur decided to open his mouth, and he didn't just nudge that assumption, he set fire to it. Speaking to the Italian press in remarks that were picked up and amplified by outlets like La Gazzetta Ferrari, the team principal addressed the Saturday struggles head-on, and the sentence that stopped every engineer and every rival team principal in their tracks was deceptively simple. He said, and I'm going to quote this directly because the wording matters, "It's a trend from the beginning of the season that we are probably a bit more performant in the race than in qualifying, but it's not only due to the engine." Not only due to the engine. That phrase tells you everything you need to know about the conversation inside. Maranello has shifted. It confirms that the engine does play some role, which is only logical in a formula as electrically dominated as this one, but it also opens a door to a completely different category of problem that the team has been keeping out of public view. Vasseur then took that door, pushed it wide enough for everyone to catch a glimpse of something, and immediately slammed it shut. "It's sometimes a parameter on the chassis," he added, "but I will keep it for me." There is a world of meaning packed into those 11 words. The phrase "a parameter on the chassis" is deliberately vague, but it is not meaningless. In Formula One engineering, a chassis parameter is not a loose concept like "the car feels weird." It refers to a specific measurable characteristic, something you can plot on a graph, something that has a number, a unit, a sensitivity curve. It could be a suspension geometry setting, a stiffness value, a kinematic behavior under certain conditions, a ride height sensitivity that triggers an aerodynamic stall, or any number of other mechanical or aeromechanical interactions that define how the contact patches of the tires behave when the driver is pushing at the absolute limit. When a team principal says there is a chassis parameter that is hurting qualifying, but he will not say what it is, you can be absolutely certain of two things. First, that his engineers have isolated the culprits and presented him with the data. And second, that this parameter is something Ferrari considers a genuine competitive secret, something that, if described even in general terms, would hand their rivals a massive clue about the philosophical direction of the SF26's design. Vasseur is not being cagey for the sake of drama. He is protecting intellectual property that took months of wind tunnel work and CFD simulations to develop, and he knows that every technical director up and down the paddock is now replaying his words and trying to reverse engineer what he meant. Now, this is the point where the story pivots from what we know into what can be pieced together from the available evidence. And I need to be very careful here because Vasseur himself has drawn a line in the sand. What follows is informed analysis based on the public behavior of the car, the timing data, the onboard footage that anyone can watch, and the comments from drivers and engineers that have been reported through official channels. None of this is confirmed by Ferrari, and I will make that clear every step of the way. But the clues are there for anyone willing to connect them. The first and most important clue is the very thing that makes the SF26 so good on Sundays. It's tire management. To achieve the kind of gentle, consistent degradation that allows Hamilton and Leclerc to push late in a stint while others fall away, the car must be operating in a very specific window of tire temperature, slip angle, and vertical load. Achieving that window requires a particular suspension philosophy, one that controls how the tire is presented to the road, how the contact patch deforms, how the energy going into the rubber is distributed. The problem is that the setup that produces this beautiful, long-lasting behavior over a race distance can be the enemy of the single explosive lap that qualifying demands. On a Saturday afternoon, a driver needs the tires to switch on instantly. The rubber needs to reach its peak grip window within one outlap and one flying lap, often on a track surface that is still evolving and with fuel loads that are a fraction of what the car carries on Sunday. If the chassis parameter Vasseur is talking about forces the tire to be treated in a way that prioritizes longevity over instant bite, then the car will always feel lazy in the first sector of qualifying, always leave the driver waiting for a front end that arrives half a lap too late.
Several former F1 engineers who now work as broadcast analysts and whose insights I have followed closely this season have pointed out that the SF26 appears to have a very narrow operating window when it comes to ride height and roll stiffness on low fuel. The onboard footage from qualifying sessions at circuits like Barcelona and the Red Bull Ring shows the car moving around a little more than its rivals in the high-speed changes of direction, and the drivers are making more small steering corrections mid-corner, which is usually a telltale sign that the mechanical platform underneath them is not quite settled. None of these observations are definitive, but when you line them up next to Vasseur's comment about a chassis parameter, they start to look less like random observations and more like the visible symptoms of a deeper design characteristic. And this is the point where the real intrigue enters the picture, because Vasseur's management style has been quietly reshaping the way Ferrari approaches problems like this one. According to several reports that have come out over the past few months, some of them from Italian sports journalists with strong ties to Maranello, Vasseur has been driving a cultural shift inside the engineering department. He has been telling his technical staff, reportedly in very direct terms, to stop obsessing over individual metrics like peak downforce numbers, horsepower figures, or suspension stiffness targets in isolation. His message has been that the only KPI, the only key performance indicator that truly matters, is lap time. That sounds obvious to the outside world, but within the hyper-specialized environment of an F1 team, where aerodynamicists live and die over their downforce coefficients and engine engineers chase every last kilowatt, it's a genuinely radical simplification. By focusing everyone on the stopwatch rather than their own departmental targets, Vasseur has been trying to force a holistic view of car performance, one where the interactions between the chassis, the aerodynamics, and the power unit all are judged on how they contribute to the overall lap time.
Unit are treated as a single system rather than three separate kingdoms fighting for resources. This philosophy explains why, when presented with a qualifying deficit, he is not simply barging into the engine department and demanding more deployment. He is looking at the whole car, including the chassis parameter he is now so famously keeping to himself, and asking how the pieces fit together to produce a faster lap on Saturday without sacrificing the Sunday advantage that is currently keeping them in the championship fight. There is another layer to this that makes the entire situation even more fascinating, and it involves the two men who have to wrestle this car around the circuit. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton cannot be more different in the way they historically extract lap time from a qualifying session, and yet both are being affected by whatever this parameter is. Leclerc's qualifying genius is built on absolute commitment to front-end grip. He turns the steering wheel with a ferocity that few drivers can replicate, relying on the car to bite instantly and rotate. If the chassis parameter involves a mechanical characteristic that delays that initial bite, he is the driver who feels it most acutely, and his radio messages from several qualifying sessions have hinted at exactly that frustration. Hamilton, on the other hand, has built his legacy on a deep, almost scientific ability to feel the rear of the car and use the brake and throttle to rotate it mid-corner. If the parameter that is costing Ferrari on Saturdays relates to rear-end stability under braking or traction out of slow corners, then Hamilton is fighting a ghost that attacks the very skill that made him a 7-time world champion. The fact that two drivers with such different styles are both unable to unlock the single-lap pace suggests the issue is not a subtle preference mismatch. It is a fundamental limit built into the car's architecture that no amount of driving style adaptation can completely overcome. Let me pause here for a moment and flag something that often gets lost in these technical deep dives. When we talk about a hidden chassis parameter, it is very easy to imagine some catastrophic design flaw that the team is desperately trying to hide. That is almost certainly not what is happening here. In modern Formula One, every single car on the grid is a collection of compromises. The art of designing a winning machine is not about eliminating compromise, because that is physically impossible, but about choosing which compromises you are willing to accept. Ferrari, by the looks of the championship standings and the Sunday pace data, has chosen a set of compromises that produces an exceptionally strong race car. The trade-off appears to be a qualifying mode that is not as sharp as its rivals.
The fact that Vasseur talks about this as a parameter rather than a fundamental mistake suggests that the engineering team knows exactly what they traded, and the debate inside Maranello is now about whether they pushed that trade too far in one direction, or if there is a clever setup trick or a development path that can give them back the Saturday pace without stealing the Sunday magic. This is not a story of incompetence. It is a story of the ninth edge decisions that define World Championship battles. The implications of this for the Constructors' Championship and potentially for the driver's title if either Leclerc or Hamilton can stay in the hunt are enormous. Race day recoveries make for brilliant television, and they have given us some of the most memorable drives of the season. But starting from the third or fourth row at every Grand Prix is a recipe for burning through your tires, your engine mileage, and your luck. The law of averages says that eventually you will get caught in a first-lap incident, or you will get stuck behind a car that is just quick enough to keep you at bay, or you will be forced to run in dirty air so long that your tires overheat before you can make your moves. Every point lost on Saturday is a point that has to be won back with interest on Sunday. And while Ferrari has been remarkably good at collecting that interest, there will come a weekend where the bill is too big. Vasseur, who is sharp enough to have run a midfield team on a shoestring budget for years before landing the Ferrari job, is painfully aware of this math. That is why he's gone public with just enough information to change the narrative without giving away the store. He is simultaneously calming the tifosi by showing he understands the problem, warning his engineers that the status quo is not acceptable forever, and signaling to the rest of the paddock that Ferrari is not as one-dimensional as the simple engine deficit story made them look. So where does this leave us? We know the engine is a factor, but not the whole story. We know there is a chassis parameter, likely a mechanical or aeromechanical setting that is eating into qualifying pace while enabling the brilliant tire wear on race day. We know Vasseur is treating that parameter as a closely guarded secret, which means it ties directly to the car's core design philosophy and could be as fundamental as the suspension kinematics that dictate how the wheels move under load. We know two world-class drivers with very different styles are both affected, pointing towards a car characteristic rather than a driver weakness. And we know that the championship clock is ticking. But there is one more piece to this puzzle that I haven't yet addressed, and it is the most uncomfortable question for anyone hoping to see Ferrari fight for a title all the way to Abu Dhabi. Can this parameter actually be changed within the 2026 season, or is it locked in by the fundamental architecture of the car? Formula One operates under a set of technical and sporting regulations that restrict what teams can change during the year. The chassis itself, the monocoque, is homologated and very difficult to alter without burning through the cost cap and your allocated number of major upgrades. Certain suspension components can be modified, but the hard points, the mounting locations on the gearbox and chassis, are largely fixed. If the parameter Vasseur is talking about is something that can be tuned through spring rates, damper settings, or the kinematics of a component that can be redesigned within the regulations, then there is real hope that a mid-season upgrade package could bring the qualifying pace without destroying the race performance. Teams have done exactly that sort of targeted development before, most notably Red Bull during some of their dominant years when they would arrive at a circuit with a tweak that transformed their slow-speed behavior. But if the parameter is embedded in a more structural aspect of the car, something like the anti-dive geometry that is cast into the suspension uprights, or the aerodynamic concept that relies on a very specific ride height platform that cannot be easily altered, then Ferrari might be stuck managing the trade-off all the way to the final race. That is the nightmare scenario, and it is the reason Vasseur's choice to speak out is so strategically interesting. By framing this as a known, solvable parameter, he is buying his engineering team time and political cover while they work behind the scenes. If they fix it, he looks like a leader who identified the problem and drove the solution. If they cannot, he has at least prepared the ground for the explanation. There is one more angle to consider that ties this whole narrative together, and it concerns the other teams. Every technical director at Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, and Aston Martin will have heard Vasseur's words and immediately tasked their performance analysis groups with digging through every scrap of data they have on the SF26. In a sport where even a blurry photograph of a floor edge can spark a week of analysis, a direct admission from the opposing team principal that a specific chassis parameter exists is a golden ticket. Rival engineers will now be looking at the way the Ferrari behaves over curbs, the way its rear squats under acceleration, the way its front right height changes through a high-speed corner, trying to reverse engineer what the secret might be. There is a delicious irony here. By protecting the exact nature of the parameter, Vasseur has made everyone else obsessed with finding it, and while they're busy chasing a ghost, Ferrari gets to work on the solution. Whether that was a deliberate piece of psychological warfare or simply a byproduct of an honest answer to a journalist's question, only Vasseur knows. I want to step back from the technical weeds for a moment and put this in a human context, because stories like this are ultimately about people. Ferrari is not just a car company or a racing team, it is a national institution, a pressure cooker unlike anything else in sport, and the weight of expectation that sits on the shoulders of Fred Vasseur, Charles Leclerc, and Lewis Hamilton is something that can either forge champions or crush them. The fact that the team has been able to deliver the race day result it has, despite a car that clearly does not suit qualifying, speaks to a resilience that was not always present in the Maranello of a few years ago. Vasseur's quiet, analytical style is the opposite of the fiery, headline-driven management that characterized some of his predecessors, and that may be exactly what a problem like this needs. A complex compromise between qualifying and race pace requires patient, clear-headed engineering work, not dramatic public declarations. And the drivers, both of whom have experienced the highs and lows of title fights, seem to understand that they are part of a longer project. Their body language in interviews, their willingness to defend the team even when the Saturday results sting, tells you that they believe a solution is coming. But belief only takes you so far when the stopwatch is unforgiving. The next few races are going to be absolutely critical. The European summer stretch includes circuits like Spa, Monza, and Zandvoort, places where qualifying position is famously important because overtaking is possible, but strategically painful. If Ferrari turns up to Monza, their home race, and qualifies off the front two rows while their rivals lock out the top spots, the pressure that Vasseur has been so carefully managing will spike to levels that no measured press conference answer can diffuse. The Tifosi will demand answers, the Italian media will run page after page of technical speculation, and every word that Vasseur has said about this chassis parameter will be dissected under a microscope. That is the storm he is steering toward, and the secret he is holding on to might be the very thing that determines whether the ship makes it through intact.